What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Relic Cruise podcast, where we dig deep to reach high. I'm your co-host, Payron Baxter.
I am your co-host Ram Sandoval. How y'all doing?
Doing all right. Hey, Ron, it looks like I don't know. Okay, we were frozen there for a little bit. I'm like, I don't know. I know you're the tech guy, but I was like just kind of like looking forward. I'm like, this ain't right. Anyway, but what's up, man? We are April 6th. Okay, so we're the day after the nationwide protest. We went out there and talked to some folks out there who did something. They was out there. And what were your just initial thoughts?
Uh yeah, while I was there, there was a lot of people. And it was interesting talking to people and hearing why they were there. At one point, I referred to it as a parade, like in the back, like I like not intentionally, just like I couldn't it didn't necessarily like feel like a lot of the protests I've been to, but it was a lot of people out there, a lot of positive I mean, positive, but it didn't feel like people were upset as they should be.
Right, right.
And it didn't really have like that like, that vigor and soul, but
That's soul, right.
I do, people do need to get out there. So, and there was a lot of people for the first time with their first protests and things like that.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, we'll talk about it some more before we deep dive. But
Yeah, no, I just want to at least first of all, I'm sorry. I'm because Payron, I didn't allow you to introduce yourself. I do apologize, Ron.
oh, I introduced myself. We introduced.
You did? Okay,
Yeah.
man. Hey, look, I still got sunbrain, man. I mean, the sun was out there. It was hot, It was on our back. But and I think that's what really teed up for our guest today was that she had posted a video and I'd seen it on Facebook and where she was telling, basically explaining like one, why black people ain't gonna be out there and how white people need to understand that this is their moment and they need to strategize and organize around this. But as I was looking at this video, I was like, I know this person. I had met her 2 years ago in Charlotte, outside of the government building, and she gave one of the most powerful bromides about like the just a really quick rundown of the history of white women, the white mistress. Being a danger within white supremacy, and it always stuck with me. In fact, I used it at one of my school board meetings that we went to when I spoke to the school board years later. So when I seen this video, I was like, I know that person. And I reached out to her and I expected her to be like, I'm too busy. I'm too busy dropping truth bombs. I'm too busy keeping it real. I'm too busy keeping it a buck, Billy. But that was not the response. The response was, yeah, let's do it. Right. And on top of that, I said, hey, you probably don't remember me, but I was out in Union County. She said the exact same thing to me about the sheriff to me that she said 2 years ago, like without skipping a beat. And I was like, "Yep, that's me. That's you. This is it." And so with no further ado, I want to introduce advocate, truth teller, an all around good person, Kristie Puckett. Everybody, Kristie Puckett.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. Do you remember me 2 years ago? Probably
I
not.
do. I do.
Okay,
I do
okay.
remember meeting you 2 years
I
ago.
have one of those kind of Joe Everyman faces where people are like, "Oh, I know your brother." I'm like, "I don't have a brother." Oh, yeah, okay. You look like a guy I know. I kind of like one of those creative player
You
faces.
look kind
So
of
I
like
just didn't know.
Lupe Fiasco, bro.
Oh,
Not everyone claims Union County, so when someone actually like claims Union County, I'm have to be like, oh, I have to take note of it, especially when they're a black person, because
right.
a lot of black people live in Union County, but not a lot of black people are vocal
Exactly.
politics in Union County. So
Yeah, no question. It's definitely a fly in the ointment situation down here. And when I met Rom, I met Rom pretty recently in my life
okay.
after the election, and he had seen me at a Democratic Party meeting where I was basically like laying into white folks about like y'all folks did this and like y'all didn't do the hard work of having the conversation with your MAGA friends, your MAGA family, and just kind of laying out the statistics, laying out like at a certain point, like black folks only do so much. And
This brother spitting. I was like,
Mathematically speaking, and I work for a voting rights organization, and I say this all the time. Mathematically speaking, Black people should be able to stay home and not vote at all. If the white folks did and voted for democracy that they claim to love so much,
mm,
mm,
then we wouldn't ever have to endure political violence and polling places that are dangerous or that are intimidating or where people feel like they can't cast their votes um, freely. And so those things happen right now, right? Every voting a cycle, we have people who are there to protect the vote. Whose vote are we protecting? We're
Mm,
protecting not white people's vote. They can vote or not vote, right? So whose vote are we actually protecting, and whose vote is in danger?
mm.
And so, like, yeah, to me, mathematically, I should be able to stay home. I shouldn't have to go out. I shouldn't have to worry about the dogs, the tear gas, any of the militarized responses that we know. We saw happen in 2020 when we saw our comrades who were doing a march to the polls, a soul to the polls.
That's right.
Them and their children were tear gassed on the way to
Mhm.
the poll in Alamance County. Like, that should never be the case. And so, like, yeah, to your point, if mathematically speaking, if the white people did what they were supposed to do, baby, I could be at home chilling.
Well, but before we get into everything, Kristie, if you don't mind, just give us a quick like
Oh, sure.
rundown, kind of your background, who you are, introduce yourself to our audience. We're growing. We know we're trying to again make our show, make
Yeah.
politics be more accessible to younger Black audience, especially in rural areas like Union County. But we're getting some nationwide reach as well. So introduce yourself to the folks. Let us know
Okay.
who you are.
Sure. My name is Kristie Puckett, and I am an activist and advocate. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I work in the nonprofit world for like nonprofit law firms, lobbying on behalf of people living here in North Carolina with criminal convictions. So people who are currently incarcerated, informally incarcerated. So I represent at the General Assembly the marginalized people of North Carolina who are second, third, fourth, fifth class citizens because they are living with the degradation that a criminal conviction carries in this country. And so my work centers on those folks, but it is rooted in my own experiences of domestic violence, of addiction, and of substance use that led me to my own incarceration. And so those experiences of incarceration, substance abuse, domestic violence, and experiencing a lot of those things while trying to parent and mother and be pregnant really shaped my view on life and how we approach policy and how policy really does entrench a lot of our life experiences. We feel like we have subscribed when in actuality we were prescribed those things. And so we didn't subscribe to anything as Black people in this country. We were prescribed these things as Black.
Mm,
And so because of that, the language has to be nuanced, and the stories that we tell, the narratives that we tell have to be nuanced. And so part of my work is to we can determine what do we want to happen, because we do know that history and the life in America is very cyclical,
right.
right? These periods where we have a revolution, and then there's this reconstruction, and there's an abolition, and then here we are in the third reconstruction
Yes, the third
moment,
Reconstruction.
right? Like, we're in this moment. And so my work is rooted in the abolition of white supremacy, and in the abolition of oppression. And I don't just work to abolish, but I also work to reimagine and to recreate. Because I think that when people hear abolition, they think it's just the termination of, the finishing of, the destruction of. And if you do meet an abolitionist and that's all that they can talk about is what they're willing to tear down, then you haven't really met an abolitionist. You've met
That's
someone
right.
playing abolition. Because the true abolitionist is supposed to be able to, think through the problems that we have, the systems that we have that aren't working, and how those things can be better. So it's not just about the removal of or the eradication of. Abolition is literally about the reimagining, the recreation, the reformation of something that actually works for everyone. And so when we talk about abolishing these systems, we're talking about abolishing the systems that pit all of us against one another. It doesn't really matter, what your political affiliation is. You should have certain things in this country. They are basic human baselines that should be met through tax paying, right? Like, a well functioning democracy has
Hello.
tenets and features that are missing right now. And
Hmm.
my work is to name those things, to tell the truth about those things, and to work to end those things, but in a way that does not cause more harm. So I like to
Mm,
find my work as harm reduction. And so it's not again, the eradication of harm, but it is the reduction of harm in an effort and an attempt to, do things differently. We cannot continue to do things the same way that we've always done them, and expect to get different results. And so I'm trying to do things a little differently, being a radical truth teller, which can be very isolating, right? People don't like to
Oh,
hear
yes.
people don't like to hear
Yes.
truth. People don't like to be accountable.
Yes.
I live a life of recovery, and it requires a rigorous accountability every single.
Yes.
And so, being able to live a life of rigorous accountability, there are other people who are not ready or willing to acknowledge exactly where they are. And so, as a community organizer, which is where I work every day in community, I try to meet people where they are, not where I want them to be,
Mm-hmm.
and try to create policies that reflect where they actually are, right? A
Mm.
lot of the policies that we have in this country, but especially North Carolina, reflects the experiences of a few people. And so the rest of us get corralled into this experience, right, of the few. So we'll see it all the time where something happens to someone in some county, one thing happens, right? And it's horrific, it's horrendous. But then there's a bill that gets written to address this one particular incident.
Right.
All the rest of us have to be governed by this isolated incident that happens in a county that we'll probably never go to. It might not ever happen again, but yet the rest of us are governed by that. And so that's kind of the way that we have governed in North Carolina. And so trying to create policies that aren't just for the one off, but for the that address the larger community and
Right. Right.
greater good. That's the type of bills that I like to work on. So I know I took a long time to introduce myself, but I think people need to know
No.
that the work that we do, oftentimes as Black people, especially Black people with trauma, we've been made to feel like our traumatic experiences are the things that we should try to hide and the things that we should try to keep close to the cuff. And I get
Mm.
that because so many times those experiences and those traumas are weaponized against us.
Correct.
When we're talking about policy and when we're talking about activism and advocating for change, those deep, dark moments are the moments that we need to be able to talk about, to unearth, because those are the experiences that create the balance to those one-off situations that we're talking about, right? So you hear about this really bad situation that happened in this county, this horrific thing, but you don't ever hear what were the factors that drove the person who was engaged in that really harmful behavior to engage in it. You don't hear that, oh, they were being abused or they
Right.
were
Mm-hmm.
victim of some really horrific thing and they didn't have any treatment. And so they were just trying to survive. And this is how they tried to survive, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we are trying to make policies that actually reflect the lived experience of people's who the policy is going to impact the most. And so when you think about writing a policy that impacts Black and brown people or people who've been to prison or people who are poor, it's very difficult simply because the people who are making decisions about whether that bill should pass or not don't have that experience.
That's right.
I've had people who have told me when we're talking about driver's licenses, they can't imagine that because they've been affluent their whole life, right?
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
can't imagine that someone can't afford a $200 fine, a court fine, and so therefore they get their license suspended. Now they can't drive, and they're just like they should just pay the $200. They just don't have the $200.
Right.
So
Right.
but they don't understand that because they've never been poor. And so
Mm-hmm.
it really requires someone who has been really poor to
Mm-hmm.
break down how someone cannot be able to afford something and to challenge the lawmakers to step outside of their own life experiences and their own constituency, because oftentimes, our maps are made up of where we live. And if you are affluent, then more than likely you come from an affluent district. And so none of the people who
Mm.
ever call you, who you ever see in community, none of the people who are in your constituency base might have this issue. So you're making a decision about food stamps when nobody in your district receives food stamps, right?
Mm.
So that's the type of issues that we as advocates and lobbyists, the way that's some of the layered mess that we have to try to wade through in order to get to actually changing policies. So yeah.
Oof. I mean, well, first of all, great introduction. Please do not apologize about that. And you laid a lot out there. I was writing some notes down as you were speaking here. But like, you're right. I think this existence in America, to be white in America, you almost have a superhumanity,
Mm.
right? So any sort of fleeting thing that ever happens to you, any sort of emotion you have, any slight trauma that you may feel, any inconvenience, the entire American, system and structure wraps around that, and they create, to your point, they create laws, and the Lake and Riley Act off of one white girl getting killed by someone who's an immigrant, and that becomes a broad swath on everybody else that is the other, right? So
Mhm.
you almost have this super on steroids humanity, right? That everybody else is just trying to attain, and at the same time we're still trying to assert ourselves, right, within inside of these systems. And then another thing you said about like um, trying to abolish white supremacy. Again, when I met you years ago, and I just knew that's kind of where your brain was. I knew that's where your brain was. 'Cause that's where my brain was. I was like, man, that's exactly what the stuff I would love to say, and the stuff that I will be saying. But that has created a fissure for me here in Union County, discussing things like white supremacy, discussing things like structural racism, discussing things like liberal white racism, and how that pops up so
Baby.
so much more frequently, right? So
And
um,
much more harmful
much
because
more harmful, right?
at least the rednecks and the racists know they are, right?
Bingo.
But now they're
Bingo.
not cosplaying. They're not cosplaying anything but what they are, right? And so, like the liberals, but Dr. King told us this. He said the white moderates. He spent them days in Birmingham,
That's
wrote
right.
up a whole dossier, put letters together for us to read and reflect on. And what he told us was that those white moderates were the ones that were telling him, "Hold up, the
Mm,
time
you,
is
you're
not
too
now.
radical.
Yeah, you're too radical. You need to wait a little while." Well, when is
Hmm.
the time that's right to do what's right? Dr. King had to ask, right? And so, like, yes, whiteness, and I think I have to make a disclaimer every time I talk about whiteness, because I think
Correct.
that white people
Hmm.
believe that they are the only ones that I am indicting.
Correct.
And I'm not. I am indicting all people because
Right.
all people have been steeped in whiteness,
Yes.
white supremacy. All of us.
Hmm. Hmm.
We all
All of us.
practice white supremacy in some form, some shape, every single day to different degrees. It is only through us talking about it and acknowledging it that we are able to do something differently. Just like in the rooms of AA and NA, the first step, you cannot change what you do not acknowledge, right? And
Mm.
so in AA and NA, you have to say that my life has become unmanageable. And you have to acknowledge that you can't do this thing and that change is needed. Same thing
Hmm.
with white supremacy. We cannot change what we do not acknowledge. If you cannot acknowledge that whiteness is the standard in this country, that all of us, and that whiteness, the standard of whiteness impacts every single person, whether they're white or not, and that white people are adversely impacted by whiteness as well. Like,
Hello.
not just Black people who are impacted by this social construct of whiteness. All
Hmm.
people are impacted adversely. All people don't benefit now. Well, now white people benefit from white supremacy,
Right.
right? But all people do not benefit, but all of us are impacted by it. And so, like, trying to break down what white supremacy culture actually is and what whiteness is is in helping people understand a social construct. So helping them understand like money is a social construct, right?
Correct.
That religion is a social construct, race, social construct, crime is a social construct.
Mm.
Depending on who's in power, all of those things look vastly different. Our money look way different now, do it not? Especially
Hmm.
after these tariffs is coming out. So depending on
Hello.
who's in power, our money spends differently because money is not a constant, it is a variable, it is a social construct. Its worth decreases, increases at whatever rate, right?
Hmm.
Same thing with crime, depending on who's in office, some things are acceptable, and when certain folks are in office, other things are not acceptable. We change the law based on who is in office, right? Race is a social, like none of these things are permanent, right? They shift depending on who has the power to shift the narrative around them. And
Hmm.
so should we really be judging one another and holding one another accountable to things that change depending on who's in power? It's
Right.
like the things that we should be measuring are the things that don't change, right? So your integrity, your propensity to be honest,
Hmm.
trustworthy, like those things, your humanness, your ability to treat people kindly. Those are the things that we should be measuring people's worth and value by. But in this country, we measure people's proximity to whiteness. And so, me, I'm a biracial woman. My dad was white, my mom is Black. And I was born, looking how I look. And so I can't pass for white necessarily, but I do have Eurocentric features. I
Hmm.
have, long hair. I have a nose that's kind of, pointy a little bit like the white folks. And, I could, be their cousin. They can see
Right.
themselves in
I
me.
think she's Sicilian.
Maybe a little bit. And I'm put a little anyway. I was getting ready to get started, but anyway, I'm so racially ambiguous though, and so I try to use that to my advantage.
Right,
Try
right.
to let white folks know that you are my cousin, like we are, probably interrelated in some way, and that my indictment of whiteness is not an indictment of your humanity or of
Right.
yours, but it is an indictment of how connected do you feel to community. Because if you would rather hold on to whiteness, then
Mm-hmm.
whiteness is all about individualism and about me,
Mm-hmm.
me, 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 me. And if we're trying to build a collective community of care and of safety, it's very difficult to do that in a place that centers whiteness and the features of whiteness.
To that point, again, the reason I reached out to you was because of your video about the April 5th protest prior
Sure.
to, oh, was it April 4th you put out? April 3rd? I mean, it was like
I put
right
on like April 3rd, so
I mean,
folks
it was
have
like,
days
and
to.
I'm sure you probably got feedback real time from people like, "Huh?"
I
I'm
did.
sure people were reaching out to you, and because I think you had a follow-up video after that, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
I did. And
Um,
I helped train some people. Like there were some groups that wanted me to come, like speak to them because there are a lot of folks who are going out for the first time. Or
yeah, for sure.
but to my point, to my point in the video, maybe not even for the first time, but it's your first time without a black buffer class, right?
A heat shield.
You ain't got no black and brown people to protect you. Nobody to absorb those rubber bullets. Nobody to absorb that tear gas. In all that OC spray, all of the militarized, less than lethal weapons that the police have at their disposal. You won't have any black bodies blocking that from you. And that was going to be different for a lot of white folks. A lot of white folks have been coming to protests and lots of actions, but they've never been there without the benefit of black bodies there to protect them. Because what they do know is even if you don't use the black body as a shield, that the police are going to aim for the black people.
Mm.
So you ain't even got to like stand behind nobody, position yourself to
He's over
like,
there.
yeah,
Right.
they shoot at the niggas. So
Right. No question.
straight
No
up,
question.
like
Right.
they don't need target practice. They looking for black people and they're gonna shoot
Mhm.
black. So yeah.
As I said earlier, before we start recording, everybody wants to be a nigga until it's time to be a nigga, and that's the reality of these folks. And I think we were talking earlier before the show, but this perversion of, well, actually, my first question was, or my first response to you was that the and Ron, please feel free to jump in. I'm sorry, I'm taking so much Chrissy's
Go
time.
ahead.
She gets me going, so
Yeah, yeah,
I'm like,
yeah.
oh, this is my jam right here. But you're right about how whiteness is really centered and propped up on individualism. And one of my analyses from yesterday, either from what I went to in Charlotte or some of the Facebook posts I've seen from around the country or even here in Union County, was that everybody had their own individual thing that they wanted to protest. Right. And which is fine. I'm not saying, yeah, you should care about Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, Department of Education closing, yada, yada, hell, jingle bell. But if you do not, they say fascism rises when there is a fractured opposition,
Mm-hmm.
when folks are not unified on what they want. And these are folks who, and dare I say, I think 99% of them were probably not Trump voters. So it's kind of like, well, what are you doing with this power? And if you're not coming together saying, we disdain the American government. The American government is our enemy, but they're saying, we shall overcome. And
Because they don't disdain the American government.
they don't. They don't.
You're asking them to say something that's not true. They
Right.
disdain what it has done to them. They don't disdain it when it was, taking voting rights from black people, when black people were being targeted by mass incarceration, when drugs were being pumped into our community, when we were over police. They were complicit and fine with
Cool.
every single one of those instances. It only became an issue when they're a brand of democracy. Now they can't go out here and get abortions beyond 12 weeks. It's a problem. It's an emergency, a national crisis,
Hmm.
right? And I
Hmm.
said the same thing when Dobbs failed back in 2022. Listen,
Hmm.
Black women have always had our reproduction in this country regulated, whether it was through forced sterilization or first birthing to make sure that we could have enough babies to pick cotton. Either which way it happens, we have never been able to procreate and have children in this country without the government being involved and intervening and surveilling. And
Mm.
so it's just never happened.
That's
And so
right.
it's like, welcome to our world. This is why Audre Lorde and Bell Hooks and Assata Shakur taught us that our solidarity was and our liberation was directly tied to one another, because what you allow to happen to me will eventually happen to you. And here we are
Mm.
at the point of reckoning where 50 years, 1973, we had Roe versus Wade. And for 50 years, white women's right to get abortion was protected, while Black people's rights were always on shaky ground and precarious. And we were always not able to access the care that we needed. And then in 2022, we see this rising, right, of the continuation of the degradation of democracy by the Tea Party, by right wingers, extremists, the MAGAs, whatever you want to name them. And here they are, right to lifers, and they take down a 50-year-old like human right that we had to access healthcare without being, penalized. And everybody's like, oh my God. It was like, well, no, actually, Black people have never had this right cemented. It was always taken away from us when they tried to say that, oh, Medicaid can't pay for this. Why? Because they thought more Black people were going to be on Medicaid.
That's right.
They blocked it from Medicaid from paying for it. It wasn't because Medicaid couldn't. They just didn't want niggas to have it. All right. And the same thing. So, like, if you look back in history, there have always been these narratives, these stereotypes that have been about Black women, whether it's the Jezebel, the Sapphire,
The mammy,
the hanky heads, all of those. And so Black women have always had to, like, Black people in general, right?
That's right.
Black people in service have always had to dissociate ourselves from like what we're actually feeling in the moment, and allowing whiteness to kind of like exist, and we just couldn't talk about it. And so all those stereotypes, especially around Black mamas, have led to social policy. So when people say, why do you care so much about the welfare queen or the crack baby? I care because those stereotypes have helped to shape social policy that still impacts us today. So people who don't get to have food stamps because they were selling drugs, that is based in that 1996 Clinton welfare reform bill, where welfare mamas were lied about, where Black mamas were made to look like they were smoking crack and just having baby after baby after baby, when the reality is white families were the ones who were using the food stamps more than anybody, and who were standing on them longer term than anybody, right? And so, but that false narrative that permeated society is what drove and cemented the social policy that we all languish under today. There are people right now who are not able to receive food stamps, even though they qualify financially, because of a policy that was rooted in a racist stereotype about Black women. I mean,
and it just goes back to your point of how white supremacy also hurts white people. The reason you don't have health care as a stay-at-home mom, if your husband loses his job, is because of this long tail of white supremacist racism. Right, I'm always against calling it just racism. No, it's white supremacy specifically, to create that hierarchy, to say, no, these people are the others and they are undeserving. It's funny, we were brought over here to, we worked for a quarter of a millennium for free. Then the exact minute we got free, that they called us lazy. It's just so ironic, right? But, and again, this is a day in and day out, thing for us. And I think, just to kind of go back to my experience here, in Union County, because I was actually in Mecklenburg before moving to Union County we were there in 2021. That's when we moved back. Once we moved down to Union County. But to your point, like, I knew I had to fight the MAGAs, and I said this a lot. Ron Turvey says a few times. I knew I had to fight the MAGAs. I knew I had to fight the Republicans, the right wingers. What Union County, Monroe, in 1960s, 55% of adult white people were card carrying members of the Ku Klux Klan. Right. So those people didn't just go away. 1965 wasn't that long ago. That's the year of the Voting Rights Act, right? So our parents, I believe your mother and my mother was not born a full person. And
people got in the water fountains, the colored water fountains.
Right. So this long history of that has not gone away. And they've had children, they've had grandchildren, and some of them are still around, right? We see Cory Booker breaking that Strom Thurmond thing, whatever the case may be. But, like, again, it's not that long. He died at 100 years old. And guess where he died at? As a senator. He was a senator when he died at 100 years old. And he was followed by who? Lindsey Graham. So, like, we have to understand, like, this history is not that long ago. No. And when folks want to tell us, well, it's not me. And I love what you said earlier, that, like, all of us are awash of it, because I actually use that tactic. Like, Jan, if I haven't arrived, and I acknowledge that I'm steeped in white supremacy, and I do my best to unlearn those things, right? To educate my children so they can have a total different understanding of who they are, their own self-confidence in this society that is meant to inform them that they are not full human beings.
That's right.
But so if I haven't arrived, don't tell me, well, I read 1619 Project in 2020. I've read, White Fragility, so I'm all good. I'm all
I think
pack it up.
people have to learn to challenge their beliefs, right? And for a lot of folks, I guess it's scary to realize that you have some of these beliefs. And one of the things that when we were out there that I thought was interesting too was that we talked to a few of the organizers yesterday, and they all had three different views. And one of them, he was saying that, man, ever since the tariffs, everyone was signing up and coming. Like that's when we got the most energy. And I was like, man, like everyone's
Right.
waiting until it hits them, and they weren't really paying attention like before willing to put into work. And so the thing that I hope that from people come out there, because Indivisible to me is one of the more progressive groups, probably also one of the more ones that are more comfortable for white folks, right? So it's like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. I went to the 5-year anniversary. I'm sorry, I think it was 5-year anniversary. And they were talking about, it was about 70, 80 people there in Charlotte, and they were talking about white supremacy and telling how this is the root of like a lot of what we're going through in these countries and relating it to the oligarchy and all these things. And I thought, again, it was very similar to like you in Union County. And as I'm sitting there, I'm like, yeah. But for a lot of folks, it was like the first time they were hearing it. I mean, but I think that some of these events like Indivisible, they weren't talking about white supremacy out there, but like we have to start arming folks to understand the history and understand like the root cause of all these issues so that they understand what they're fighting against and that they're a part of it, because otherwise it's just, I mean, like we're just pretending like something doesn't exist. Yeah.
So I think before we can do any of what we have to do when we're talking to white people about whiteness is put some disclaimers out. And then we also have to factor in that there is going to be a lot of fragility and white tears and a lot of whataboutisms, which as Black people, we're going to perceive as micro and macroaggressions, right? It's like we're going to have to like prove what we're saying about white supremacy. And so I think if you go in knowing that, because I do think like, okay, I have critiques when white people are teaching other white people white supremacy. It's like, girl, do you really know? Like, I mean, you read a book.
They had a black speaker. He was on point. So
yeah, no, I'm just saying
yeah.
But when but oftentimes we see white people teaching white people white supremacy, and it's like, And then for Black men, what we also have to say is, are you talking about patriarchy? Because that's also a feature of white supremacy. And if you're not mentioning those words about patriarchy and how, misogyny and misogynoir are real in the community, then also like, so we have to be willing to talk about white supremacy in all of its flavors, right? Because it's not just about white people. It's about religion. It's about I call it white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, right? That's what we are having. We are having to attack whiteness. We're having to attack that Anglo-Saxonism, which whatever that identity is
from Europe,
and that Protestantism, right? Which is that puritanical, that very work hard, eat by the sweat of your brow, like all of that has really shaped policy in our country. And what it doesn't do is allow for people, when we talk about the work by the sweat of your brow, if you don't work, you don't eat. What is it? Where does that leave our disabled community? Right? And so you have to, so those type of policies, that mindset still shapes policy. To think about it, disabled people can't get married or they'll lose their benefits. Right? Or sometimes disabled people, they are married already and then they become disabled and have to get divorced in order to get the benefits. So like we don't always make sure that our social contracts that we create under white supremacy cover the entire polity. So that's why white supremacy is so harmful, because even though let's not even talk about race, let's just talk about any other identity. White supremacy does not allow for those identities that it did not create, right? So we see this $240 billion was spent last cycle, y'all. Excuse me, 240 million. Oh, where's the billion? I can't remember if it's billion or million.
On that ad.
On an ad, on that one ad that we all saw, right? And so I have so many critiques of both sides, not just the right, but of the left.
No question.
Of how whiteness has not really, whiteness is what's always on the ballot in this country. Black people, we should not see ourselves as Democrat or Republican, because neither one of those parties are writing policies that address us. So when we even talk about Joe Biden, like, and I love Joe. I mean, I'm so glad that he had like this really storied career and it was very long. And I know there's going to be people who are like, Kristie, wait a minute, he was a Zionist or he allowed genocide to happen. And I get that, right? But show me a politician who has not. Genocide and war is a part of politics. And if
In
you
America, for damn sure.
so like it's just because Britain, right? Which is where we are derived. This is how they colonized. They colonized and imperialized through violence. And so, like, I'm not excusing what has happened, but that is what happens, right? And so when I think about a Joe Biden, and I think about someone who to the point of the young folks who are critiquing the lack of response, right? Like Cory Booker stood up there for 25 hours and didn't say nothing about Gaza the whole time. You couldn't say nothing about a genocide that's raging the 25 hours. You talk about,
or even like Mahmoud Khalil, he could have said something about an actual someone who was
students that are being like, yeah, he could have said anything to acknowledge like the way the democracy is being experienced by the younger people. And so neither side has got it right for Black people or for marginalized people. And so when I think about like, what does it really mean to be politicized today? It really does mean to figure out what your identity is and be willing to fight for it. So for me, I'm Black first. So I'm gonna fight.
That's right.
It's a Ray. I'm fighting for everything Black.
That's right.
Everything Black, right? If it's the LGBTQIA is your identity that you, now I argue to those folks who are Black, they don't know that we don't know who you love and what you love until you tell us, but we know you Black.
That's right.
Right. But if they want to identify within the LGBTQIA community first, I believe in that. That's cool. Figure out what your identity is and organize around that, because we do have to have something to rally around. To y'all's point, white people have never really had to have an identity as far as like.
That's right.
That's why it's so hard for them to say what they're standing, what they came for. And so you got different answers because we know what we fighting for as Black people. We ain't have to take no class on it. We ain't have to listen to no podcast. Like inherently, we know, right? They don't know. And so I think for them, it's going to have to be, they're going to have to organize around an identity. What is that identity? It can't be whiteness.
I say, because that's what Trump ran on. Trump ran on white identity politics.
Yeah, it can't be that. It can't, and it can't be like a class thing. It's gonna be what is the trait? Is it going to be kindness? Is it going to be humanity? Like they're going to have to say that we are out rallying. And even it's democracy, right? I can see that they're going to fight for democracy, but they're going to have to be willing to fight. I think that a lot of people forget that there was an act of violence to put the tea into the harbor. Right? That's like that tea, y'all. But back then, that was like cocaine.
Right.
Put all them people dope in the water. You know what I'm saying? Like that was an act of like severe violence, severe resistance. And that would have been property damage today. That would have been like going downtown Charlotte and busting out all the Bank of America's windows, right? Unless you are willing to engage in that level of action, gathering and kumbayaing is not going to save democracy. Those folks in whatever year that was, right, 1770, whatever, they said no taxation without representation. They engaged in an act of violence, because the tea that they threw into the harbor, they didn't own that tea. That was tea that was supposed to be sold and taxed and all of those things. So they engaged in property damage, looting, whatever you want to name it, right, under today's terms. And they did it in a way that really hurt the British Empire. If your action is not really hurting the American Empire, then it really is just performance. You're going out to say, I was outside in 2025 on April 5th, and it's a pat on the back, and it's all about looking good for your grandkids. Again, individualism. Not really caring about the greater good of this country, whether your grandchildren are going to have democracy or not. You are there to make sure that your picture was on the right side of history as an individual, not to enshrine democracy for future generations. And so I do think that we are going to have some real honest conversations with white people about how whiteness has protected and shielded them from identifying with other folks, marginalized communities for so long, and how that individualism has caused them to see themselves as like the great white hope. Because why weren't they out 5 years ago like this?
Sure won't.
When George Floyd's life was snuffed out in front of our lives, in front of our faces by Derek Chauvin, and he was begging for his mama. That didn't move you to come outside, but
They did put a flag out in their yard though.
oh, in
It
this
said
house, Black
in this
Lives Matter.
house, science is real, love who you love, and Black Lives Matter. So I'm just
And the Black Lives Matter was at the end out of all of that.
What do you think was the turning point during those protests?
For George Floyd?
Mm-hmm.
What do I think was the turning point? I think it was just what ended up happening was when George Floyd was killed, right, and on everybody's TV. I think it was just a perfect storm. I don't think it was so much. We had seen Alton Sterling, we've seen Eric Garner, we've seen Trayvon Rice, but we had never been at home, locked down, unable to go anywhere.
right, COVID. Mm-hmm.
Right. So it was a perfect storm because we were trapped in our homes. All we have is TV and it's playing over and over and over again. And then when somebody said, let's protest, hell, we hadn't been outside since March. This is now May. Baby, we outside. Okay.
Right.
We was outside.
Yeah.
And I do think that the turning point was the sheer amount of people and the continuation. I think they thought that we were going to protest for like a day or two,
Mm-hmm.
and then it would be done. But those protests went on all summer long. Then it was an RNC was happening. It was an election year, and it just kept going and going. So I don't think it was necessarily a turning point as far as I can speak to North Carolina specifically. Let me speak to North Carolina. When that Confederate came down from the state capitol, because we had protested so hard and so good that they had to spend millions of dollars. Governor Cooper had to call in millions of dollars to remove those Confederate monuments from the Capitol building. I believe that's when the tide changed here in North Carolina, because I believe former Speaker Tim Moore and current Senator President Phil Berger said, not in this Raleigh, these Negroes ain't gonna have no Black Lives Matter Boulevard, and not in this Raleigh. And I believe they began to immediately write the bill that they were able to pass in 2022 around protests that expanded the criminal penalties for protest and really chill people's desire to continue to go out.
You know what sticks out in my head is what I have believed to be the turning point, at least in my mind. And I looked up some of these dates as you were talking, but when the Target got burned down
in Fayetteville.
It was in Minneapolis, yeah.
Oh, in Minneapolis.
And Target started changing their tune, and this happened in late May, early June 2020. And to your point about North Carolina flag coming down, that was in June 20th, 2020, and I think something shifted. And even Target, then that's when we started seeing like all this like DEI and Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter was like a marketing. Right. It was a marketing tool.
I am black.
Well, so that was supposed to assuage Black people. That was supposed to be the pacifier in the crime now, right? And so none of that was a real turn from white supremacy.
Well, here we are.
Yeah, as much as it was put the pacifier in the baby's mouth. We're tired of seeing. And they have a legitimate reason to be crying, like so legitimate that we can't even tell them to stop crying, but let's just do these little things that we might get them to stop crying, right? So none of that was really real, because again, the people who really had the power, not the ones to paint the street, not that kind of power, but the kind that changed the laws.
With the pen.
Folks were in the back room writing down, like, right? They were figuring out what their response to all of this was going to be, while the other side was kneeling with Clinton cloths.
Oh, I remember that.
When Nancy Pelosi kneeled.
Oh, yeah.
So it's my critique. Now, listen, I don't like Republican policies all the time. Some of their policies be all right. I ain't gonna lie to you. Sometimes they have good talking points and their policies be all right. Like a broke clock can be right twice a day, right? my critique of the Democrats is, and let me just say this, I have never been a Democrat or Republican. I've always been an independent, unaffiliated voter because I have never seen myself represented in either one of the parties. I've never seen the needs and the desires of my people. I'm from the hood here in Charlotte, North Carolina, Nations Ford Road. I have never seen the people of Nations Ford Road wants, needs, or desires represented at any level of government, right? And so that's what prompted me to move into lobbying and try to create policies that do represent people on Exit 4 in Nations Ford Road in Charlotte, so that they do know that they can come from that hood that has been over-policed and under-resourced and still, have a good life, right? If I can go from smoking crack on Nations Ford, on Beatties Ford Road, and looking crazy up 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, and now I'm up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning reading bills and analyzing bills. Like, I want people to know that you can have life experience, life can come at you fast, and you can still be someone, right? But it doesn't require that you enter into a party, right? Because Democrats, both parties are beholden to their super donors. The difference is that the Republicans really are unified. Now, they're not always unified around tactics or even the strategy, but they are always unified on the goal.
In the end game, correct.
Correct. And they might not like your ass, but if you go get up to the goal, they will follow you religiously.
I mean, you think Ted Cruz likes Donald Trump and vice versa? That's one example.
They don't like each other.
But like, these are people that have, and Ted Cruz is not a white man, but he upholds white supremacy, and as long as he can do that, he is of utility to a party that is 90% white, that has the end goal of this hierarchy and this hegemony that has always existed, and that's what they're fighting against.
Required the complicity of Black and brown people.
That's right.
So he's just playing a role that historically has always been played by someone.
That's
so
right.
We can't be mad at the Ted Cruzes or the Marco Rubios or any of these people of
Tim
color.
Scotts,
Omarosas, like, no, you get mad at people. Those people have always look. Remember Django? What was Steven? What was Steven doing?
And I used this line when I spoke at the NAACP dinner, my first year as the chair here. I said, I was trying to give an example of, like, we're in a burn the sheets moment. And what did Stephen say when Django came to the house? He said, well, sleep. Who gonna burn the sheets?
He said, who gonna burn the sheets?
So that's the moment that we're living in.
When she said, how I treat him like white folks? He said, Don Johnson said, nope. He said, treat him like the Checkerwood boy Jimmy down the street. That thing, baby.
That's right.
And see, whiteness also creates a hierarchy. You had white folks who were land-owning slave owners who considered themselves to be above the Peckerwoods or the crackers, who were overseers, or the sharecroppers or the indentured servers kind. So, like, I mean, I feel like when you think of the two-party system that we have, again, they are beholden to the rich donors,
the modern day robber barons,
and the APACs, and all these other, like, super PACs that pay them. And so what happens is, especially on the Democrats. Now, again, I tell you what I appreciate about the Republicans. They fall in line and they march like little ducks.
Well, it's also easy to do that when you're homogeneous, right? Like, when you're all kind of one thing, like,
each other, but they really don't, because they see. I guess I see from a different perspective. I work at the General Assembly, and I see the Republican caucus and I see the Democratic caucus, right? The Republican caucus is organized, baby. When I tell you them people is organized, they are about their.
But they're organized to do what? They're organized to make sure that,
but they still
right. I mean, so, like, to a degree, I can agree with you on that, but it's like they're organized to dismantle and harm us.
Yes,
like, that doesn't take much.
But it doesn't. But the other side is not responding.
Correct. And I also agree with that.
And so that's how you know they are complicit in this. Because if you wanted to really win, this wouldn't be your stance. This wouldn't be your next move.
Trying to appeal to these suburban white women, that's the goal.
How they lost too, right? You think about what Joe Biden talked about, student loans. Well, what does that leave all of our blue collar workers who don't have student loans? What economic or financial relief will they receive? So the only people who get to receive relief are the elitists, the people, or
In their
viewed
minds, right?
in community in society who can afford to go to college. Okay, then you talked about the trans rights and all and that stuff, and that's beautiful. We want people to be able to exist and to show up in the way in which they see fit. Um, and at the same time, they represent less than 1% of the community.
Mm-hmm.
So why would we run a whole campaign that centers 1% of our polity? It just doesn't make good political sense. It's not a good strategy. But
But did the Democrat? I mean, this is not me. I'm thinking, even
oh,
though
they
I'm a
did.
chair, but I'm just saying, like the Republicans made that with that ad, right? They made that the talking point, and then
It did.
I had on we had on a an organizer here in Union a few weeks ago about this whole and specifically, but I used a larger example that our history as Black people came about. It's the like they will have a raft of bills to attack any minority, right? Immigrants, trans folks, women,
Mhm.
disabled folks. And then the exact minute someone that is not of that community steps into the breach that says, don't do that. It's the same thing when they were passing a raft of bills against Black people. Then a white person would step up and they would say, you're a nigger lover. And then that fear of having that label on you causes you to retreat. And the Democrats they are exercising that at the highest level where, like, again, Republicans are passing bills after bills after bills about trans people. And then if you say, hey, well, trans people, they deserve to have love. Oh, you're a
You're a
groomer,
groomer, you're a
you're this,
pedophile,
you're
yeah.
that, or like you're that, and or for women, or are you gay, or it's the same thing. And the
Mhm.
thing is, because they have no affirmative agenda. And I talking to Wesley Harris, who's
Yeah.
going to be running for the Charlotte Dems, and I said, hey, like you guys got to have a positive agenda, not just we're against what they're saying. At least the right saying like we're for locking them up, mass
So that was
deportation now,
you're making my
police
point
abuse.
for me.
Mm-hmm.
They took on the Republican, whatever the Republicans said, and they
Mm-hmm.
were just defending that. So it made it seem like all they were talking about was defending this ad. So we
Exactly.
never got to hear what are you actually going to do for people. All they
Right.
were doing was responding to this really harmful ad, and they should have ignored it. They should have talked about their own talking point. This is what we're going to do for the people, while they're focusing on this very small subset. If they want to run all their bills on this small subset of Americans,
Mm.
that's fine, but we're going to have bills that cover all of Americans, right?
Right. Right.
There was none of that. There was nothing unifying. I also made calls for Kamala's campaign, right? I made calls for Kamala's campaign, and the amount of anti-blackness that exists
Mm.
in this country,
Talk
the
about it.
amount of anti-womanness that exists in this country
Hello.
from other
And
women,
together, the massage noir.
baby. It was just like she didn't really stand a chance. She didn't have a lot of time. She had about 100 days because the Democratic
107
Party really
days.
didn't want to let a Black woman run anyway, right? They still wanted this octogenarian. Love you, Joe. Love you, Joe. They still wanted the octogenarian.
Mm-hmm.
Was sleepy and tired. To Trump's point, he won't lie. The man was sleepy.
Hey,
And
look, during the debate with Trump, this is when I knew I was like, "Whew, this is
I'm
tough. When he said, what you said, I'm
I
sorry,
was
Ron?
just saying I miss Sleepy.
To a degree, like we need a little sleepy.
I need
'Cause,
Joe.
we got golfy,
I
and they're like the seven dwarves. But during the debate, and Joe Biden stood there and he said, "We finally beat Medicare." I was like, "Oh my God, what is he talking about?" I
You're
mean,
not kidding me.
the man's. I mean, like so, like. There's a lot of, especially liberal white folks, who are like, "Oh, they shouldn't have got Joe to drop." I mean, that's a debate we can have 100 years, and for another 100 years. But to a degree, there's a level of like, as we talked about, like, substance abuse or
Mhm.
white supremacy, you have to always live in the real. And I think since me and you have both dealt with substance abuse, we have a different mindset as it relates to living in reality, because
Yeah.
you have to be almost ultra real all the time,
Well,
and
yeah,
most folks
I
aren't.
think that most people are medicating themselves, right?
Mm,
Most people do not like to live life on life's terms. They don't have to. There's some way that they
mm,
protect and shield, and really, it's our brain who does this, right? Our brain is constantly trying to make sure that it centers our comfort, right? And
yep.
so it tries to protect us from like harsh realities, and it does a lot of work to, again, protect us, protect our psyche. And so I think some of that is happening subconsciously, but I do
Hmm.
think we other people we prioritize comfort, right? And we don't like to be uncomfortable, and we've gotten away from understanding that in that discomfort is where the most growth happens. I teach a lot of classes to white folks about white supremacy culture in organizations.
Mm.
How
How do those go?
Well, I mean, it starts slow. It has to start slow. We have to really start by defining white supremacy, whiteness, race as a social construct and understand that, again, this is not a personal indictment for you. This is an indictment of all of us as a society, that all of us have a responsibility and a duty to create the world that we would like to see. And we can't do that if we don't acknowledge the way things are. And so, you know, I don't mince a lot of my words. So the white people who come, they already kind of know who I am and how I come. I'm not here to hurt your feelings, but I'm also not
No,
here to babysit you.
come
Um,
on,
and I
come on.
just, that's not my, and, you know, white people have been coddled a lot. And so,
No.
and what I've experienced is, you know, they've not been supervised by Black people, meaning that they've never been under the supervision of Black people. They've never had Black people be able in a position of power to tell them what to do and not to do.
But I think that's why they get so irritated when they do have a black manager,
I
or they do have
know.
a black county chair, or they do
That's
have something, and they're
true.
like, okay, you know, it's too
And so,
much.
but so what I have to teach them is that their preference for the way we've always done it, that's called traditionalism. That's the biggest feature of white supremacy. So when
Yep.
you come here telling, well, Kristie, we've done it this way all the time. That's the biggest feature of white supremacy. You disavow yourself of that.
Hmm.
When they come and they're crying about how they feel attacked, you know, okay, so now is your eye black? Is your nose bloody?
Hello.
That's an attack. Okay, so we have to redefine words because
Mm.
they've weaponized language for so long that it's like a default. But you're attacking me. No, this is attacking you. Punch you in your shit. That's attacking you. Let me tell you show you what attack look like.
Right,
That's
right.
attack. And you not liking what I'm saying is not an attack. You don't like what I say. And so also it looks like teaching white people that, right? Like there's a difference between I don't
Being
like
uncomfortable and
saying,
harm.
right, and you're doing something to me. And so, because they have to understand that so much of society operates on their comfort. So they're not used to being uncomfortable. So you're in the sweet spot if you're uncomfortable. I'm doing my job correctly if you're
Hmm.
uncomfortable. If you're
Hmm.
leaving out of here cool, calm, and collected, then you don't need to pay me no money because I ain't doing my job. My job is to irritate, agitate, because that's how the clothes get clean in the wash machine, by the agitation. Clothes
Hello.
clean by just laying there. Clothes get clean by being agitated in that wash machine. And so we can't get clean and we can't get to where we're supposed to be as a community if there's no agitation.
So when you go in these conversations, because when you're talking to us tonight, I know you gave a few disclaimers and you kind of I guess soften the blow, but like when you go into these
I don't.
conversations with a well, more than some, but like literally, like you gave
I'm
a
doing that for
disclaimer. You
y'all,
said
for this
you
radical roots. I'm trying to be nice. I want some
No,
clients potentially.
well, so but
you
when
ain't,
you
you
go
ain't
into a
got to.
conversation, with a room full of white folks, like what how do you go start those conversations?
I tell them, hey, white people, and they look real crazy. And then I acknowledge that I know you're used to being called Americans.
Exactly.
But if I got to be black, you got to be white. So
That's right.
you don't get to racialize me and you don't get racialized back.
Bingo. White's a
And so
color. People
that's
of color, white's a color.
right. So that's an immediate like they're immediately shaken in that first 2 seconds because again, saying hey white people, they number one they think is rude. But why when you talk about black people, it's not rude to say it's a group of black people or blacks,
Mm.
right? But if I call you a white person now, all of a sudden you act like I slap you in your mouth. Why? And so we have to talk about, you know, what being racialized means. Like if I get it, you're used to just being an American, right? But I'm gonna call you a white American. Like if I gotta be African American or Afro
You're
American or
European American.
you got it right. And so it starts with something as simple as that identity. How do you identify? And
Mm.
so they get that because they immediately feel that sting of being called white. But why
Hmm.
is it a sting? Why? Because you've been protected from being called white. You have, because you know that calling someone out by their race hurts, right?
Hmm.
Right? Because it hurts you, but it's okay to call me black, right? And that's
Hmm.
cool. So we start the conversations like that. We also talk about what is their understanding of whiteness. So I think it's really important for me as a facilitator to listen. I can't assume that we all have the same understanding. So before we start defining things, I try to figure out where everyone is. Because again, it's very important for me to meet people where they are, not where I
Right.
want them to be. And so understanding what their idea of whiteness is, how do they see themselves as being privileged? That has been difficult for a lot of poor white people, that word privilege.
I'm
That
not privileged. I grew up poor too.
And
I've
I
heard that a million
remind
times.
them that you're poor because your people were lazy, not because they were being discriminated against. Okay.
Hello.
If there are poor white people amongst us, that's because they were not. What was your people doing when everybody else was raping and pillaging and stealing and owning people? What was your people doing? Fucking laying up under the tree, drinking and eating tobacco, like smoking tobacco. What were they doing? Because they could have been getting to the generational wealth, and they. And so I don't feel sorry for poor white people either, because you've had generations to get ahead and to be ahead. And if you're not, that's on you. That's your own DNA. That's your own legacy of Slavic or whatever, right?
Right.
I don't like that. I look at Ron looking at me like, Kristie, for real? Yeah, because we have to be able to tell the truth about the situation. People was getting to the money. Candyland was getting to that candy, right? What was your people doing? They had to be drunken and drinking and lazy and shiftless and loitering.
Well, it kind of goes back to, like, when we talk about the indentured servants, and it's like, it's easy to tell these folks that come from Europe, who are not, that were not considered white, that, like, your job is to look over these Negroes. And, sitting on a horse ain't a job. And that was the biggest fear of freeing the captives. Because if you free the captives, I ain't got no skill set. Sitting on a horse ain't no skill set. And then this is where you get into the idea of, then these black folks, they're so licentious, they're going to rape your women, they're going to kill you, they're going to knock you in the head. But yeah, I mean, but we're about an hour now, and I do have one final question on my end. I don't know if Ram has a final question, but we appreciate all your time, Kristie. This has been a blasty blast. I knew this was going to be like this. This is my first time having a true sit down conversation with you, and I knew it was going to be like this without me even having this ever before. But anyway, earlier we talked about the concept of democracy, and I have a kind of a beef with just the way we use this word. I mean, as you said earlier, language is just so powerful, and it can be a weapon, or it can be a solve. But this whole, I think that we'll use this past election, but dare I say, it's been happening for probably this entire country. But the word democracy is amorphous. It doesn't have a shape. It doesn't really have an understanding in the zeitgeist or in the general politic in the minds of Americans. But I think if folks, let's say, for example, Kamala Harris would have leaned into her blackness, leaned into her Indianness, leaned into her womanness, and talked about the benefit of a multicultural democracy. Because what's the point of a multicultural democracy? It's to put as much power and resources in the hands of as many people as possible, rather than just the hands of a consolidated few. And I think when we run from that, we just say things like, economics. As we know, as James Baldwin said, capitalism is just an excuse for racism. It sounds like you're trying to keep that power within that small group of people. And on top of that, it sounds like the democracy is just the system as is. And if I'm poor, if I'm living in the Mississippi Delta, if I'm living in Louisiana in one of the wards, and it's like, this whole country is my enemy. This whole country ain't working for me. So you saying democracy versus, and this is kind of my beef with, not beef, but my historical take on, like, the Freedmen's Bureau, during Reconstruction. It's like they had to have, and with at the time the radical Republicans, they had to have race specific legislation. Like they say, hey, we freed these captives. We freed these, at the time they called them slaves, but they were captives. We freed these captives. Now we got to educate them. We freed these captives. Now we have to make sure that they have access to medical care. Now we have to make sure they have access to non-discrimination. Like, so they had race specific legislation. That has gone all out the way during the redemption era. Hence, that we had 100 years of legalized apartheid, Jim Crow. So I think in this most recent election, saying democracy as this unshaped thing has harmed black people. I think it has harmed any sort of progress, and it has allowed for, that's the thin side of the wedge, for the right wing to then commandeer that for patriotism, right wing authoritarianism. What are your thoughts on the not putting racial specifics around multicultural democracy? What are your thoughts?
I think that the people who have the most money at the top of the Democratic Party are white.
Yep.
And whiteness wants to remain the center of attention.
No question.
It's like a old ballerina who doesn't know to turn in her shoes and it's time to sit down, right? Old white people, like, look, Nancy Pelosi, look at Diane Feinstein, like, look how long they beat Chuck Schumer, freaking what's the man, Mitch McConnell, like, they stay
Oh my
too
God.
long, like, so, like, that's the thing. So when we think about democracy, well, first of all, in this country, when we think about Black people and politics, you have to remember that Black people's citizenship has always been shaky,
Yep.
right? Like
Mm-hmm.
we get citizenship and then they take it back. You know, it's always these conditions in order to be a citizen. But then the immediate next question, if we do get the citizenship, is what are those Negroes going to do with it?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that what we saw this last election is that very phenomenon that, okay, we can have a Kamala Harris. She can be the president. She can be the nominee. She can be the citizen. But what's she going to do when she get it? Right. And so there's this distrust that exists. And so we have to create a multicultural democracy, a multiracial democracy, because it is what best represents our country. There have to be policies in place that take into consideration people's lives and their experiences, their culture. Because when you have a culturally informed policy or trauma informed policy or a policy that is just informed by the people, the impact is what you want it to be. Oftentimes, what we see is the intent. This law was made because the intent was this, but then we see all these adverse impacts because they were never writing the policy for the impact. They were only writing it for the intent. And so as a Black policy writer, as a Black policy person, I write policy and I measure the intent of that policy while we're writing it. I don't really worry, I mean, the impact. I don't really worry about the intention because it may not happen as I intended. But if I measure the impact, then I will make sure that the impact happens that I want to happen. And so I think a good example of that is the bill that we were able to get passed for that protected pregnant women who are incarcerated. Pregnant women who are incarcerated in this state are routinely shackled to the bed while they're delivering their babies, and were routinely placed in solitary confinement prior to giving birth. And so those are really inhumane conditions that people were existing up under. And so
what was that bill number?
It was House Bill 608, and it became law in 2021. And so where it banned the shackling of pregnant women and really provided a lot of supervisions for pregnant folks. And so the dignity, the humanity of those women were not being centered. And so my intent was for them to be safe, but I couldn't really worry about what my intent was. I had to make sure that the impact was safety. So like, sure, that was my intention, but how do I write the bill so that the impact is that they are safe? And so when we think about democracy, it has to be in that same context. It has to be, the intent is for all of us to be represented and to feel included. But what is the impact? The impact is that some of us are included and some of our voices rise to the top. So if we're going to create a true democracy, we have to stop talking about what we intend to do. And we have to really measuring our impact. And so if the Democratic Party, my best advice for the Democratic Party is to learn organizing. Everyone should be taking my organizing 101 class. I'm happy to teach. But because it talks about relationships and how relationships are really the fabric of how we build power, and building power is how we change policy, and policy is how we cement the power that we've built into time. It's how we freeze our power. So it's not enough just to build the power. We have to take the power and do something with it. And we have to do something that's not transactional, but we have to do things that are transformational. And so the bill passed is transformational because it freezes that power into time. My bill is still law. Until somebody comes and thaws it out and writes a bill to replace it, the bill that I wrote, Kristie's bill, is still the law of the land right now, right? And so when I think of a democracy, I think we have to think of it like that there are going to be things, when I work on a bill with some Republicans, there are going to be things that they want, there are going to be things that I want. How do we get to a place where we can all feel good about it? It's going to take some discomfort, right? I have to sit with folks who don't believe that Black people should exist. But I have to negotiate with them on behalf of.
But we all do, though, to a degree. Like I think when people they may hear you say that, but people forget we do that all the time.
You got people at your child's principal don't like
your
kid, and you got to go down there and tell him stop treating my child any kind of damn way, right? So we all navigate this, power dynamic in real life, and so having a democracy that represents all the people, it's going to be uncomfortable. I think we have to get uncomfortable with discomfort. And we also have to get comfortable with 1 Thessalonians 4:11, since these people love the Bible so much, but they read it don't not enough, which is mind your business. Literally, Paul's letter to the Thessalonians was to mind your business. And we have a lot of people minding other people's business, but not for the right reasons, for surveillance.
That's right.
We have to be mindful of those around us and our neighbors, because we want to make sure that we have policies that cover everyone. But we also can't not be minding other people's business. And so I think for us to have a real, true democracy, we are going to have to embrace other people who do not look like us, who do not speak like us, who do not think like us, and really be okay with them existing. We have to be okay with the MAGA hats. I'm okay with the MAGA folks. I don't care that they buy the MAGA hats and wear them out in our proud.
I want them to have health care too.
Yeah. Just leave me the fuck alone. Like, just be over here bothering me. You know what I'm saying? Like, we cool. When I see him, I don't have no problem with the people. I know how to coexist. I know that democracy, having a real democracy, means that I fight as a civil rights activist for their civil rights to exist as well.
Right. That's right.
I hate the Proud Boys, but I'm also okay with there being a Proud Boy for me to even argue with, because they have a right to argue. This is America. Like, it's not always comfortable with the things that they say. It's not always comfortable with the things that they do, but they have a right to be here. And I also had a right to punch them in their shit, right? Like, so this is America. Like, this is America. And I think we need to preserve the best of it and really be working on the parts of it that none of us really like. None of us like working 40-hour work weeks, not having maternity leave, not having paternity leave, not having high wage jobs, not having guaranteed overtime. Like, there are certain protections that we all deserve, no matter what ticket we punch, on our voter registration.
That's right.
And I think that what I try to remind folks of, and what I've learned so much more of while I'm working at the General Assembly, is that all of us, when I talk to communities, and I go across North Carolina talking to communities, white, black, poor, Republican, Democrat, because I believe in really listening to the people. What is it that the people want? Everybody wants the same thing. I have been across the country, across the world, and every time I talk to people in community about safety and what does it look like, they all describe the same thing. We all have different ideas about how to get there. We all want to raise our children in healthy, vibrant, thriving, safe communities. We all want that. We all do not think that policing is the way to get there. We all don't believe that prisons and incarceration is the way to get there.
We all think that?
I said we don't all think that.
We don't. Okay.
I'm sorry.
I was like,
all think that. No, we don't.
I was like, she lost me at an hour and 14 minutes.
But we all want that, but we don't all think that that's how we get there, right? And so I think we have to, find our people, find the people who want what we want, and find the people who are willing to work on those things the way that we're comfortable with. And understanding that's, again, why relationships are important, because someone across the aisle, you can have a relationship with them. You may not have the same exact values, but you want the same outcomes. That's somebody that you can work with, because I don't like you, you don't like me, but we want the same thing and we have a common interest. And relationships are about common interests and an exchange of interest and resources, right? And so finding folks with common interests is what a democracy is all about. And that's what we should be working towards. We should be we should be less concerned about partisan politics and more concerned about the values and the principles that we have, that we want to see reflected in community.
Yeah, that was good. You said get comfortable being uncomfortable, and if we want to be a multicultural democracy, I think that really hits. And one, I'll kind of leave it at this because it's a lot of stuff you said, or actually what you kind of gave in that last summary reminded me of one of the replies we got after our coverage of the protests, and we asked, well, what are you looking to get out of this? We got a reply. It was from a black woman, but she said, I believe we must marshal all of this energy into continual organizing, political education, community care, and mutual aid. This system as it exists today cannot continue. We need a radical revolution of values, as Dr. King said. This "Pray with Your Feet's" her name, but I think that's, a lot of what you said, and like that's like what my hope would be out of it. Out of this movement that's the beginning. But yes, thank you Thank you for.
No, thank you all. I think that you
Yes.
all are doing a brave thing by having the conversations, going out and talking to people is so necessary. So many people, um, civics has been discontinued in education, in educational settings for a very long time. The average
Yes.
person does not even understand what a democracy is, what
Mm-hmm.
they're fighting for, how their votes. The average person does not. I take adults to the General Assembly to teach them how a bill becomes a law because they really
Mm.
know what happens and they don't understand how much of a miracle it is when a law is passed, because it is 1,000 ways, 1,000,000 ways for a law to die, to be killed, for the people in power to not let your law get passed. And so anytime we get something done, especially as Black people, as directly impacted, formerly incarcerated people, done in that building on Jones Street, it is a miracle. And so I think that people don't celebrate it enough because they don't know just how difficult it is.
Right.
And so part of our job is to teach folks that, yes, this is very difficult, it's very hard. And it
It's
feels really
worth
good
it.
to go to bed at night to know that all the horrific, horrible things. I was incarcerated while pregnant. So the bill that
Mm.
I was incarcerated while pregnant. I was substance use and I received no prenatal care. I found out, I took a plea deal, got out, and found out 5 days after on the delivery table. So I got released, and then 5 days later, I have a set of twins. I found out on the delivery table. So my work around women who are pregnant and incarcerated is from my own pain, right? And so we've been able to
Mm.
take the things that were very painful and to
Yes.
take the things that we were passionate about, to
Right.
turn those things into policy, to turn them into power. And so as Black people, we have the propensity and the ability to do that. There are people out here who are willing to help us do that. And so my job is really to be the spook by the door. I sit in some of the most powerful places in the world and listen and try to learn as much as I can and bring that back to community. So that's why it's important to be on podcasts, to debunk and to demystify the work that we do, because I'm just a regular girl from Charlotte, North Carolina, who
Mm.
decided that I was tired of being tired in a different way and that I was
I
going to do
love it.
different. And if I can do it, literally anybody can do it. And if anybody wants to do it, they can always reach out to me, Kristie underscore 1979 on all social medias, and inbox me the same way you did, and we can have a conversation and begin to build.
Well, Kristie, thank you so much for joining us. And before you go, tell
Mhm.
us how folks can sign up for you. Say you have a course, a class. Like,
Yeah,
how
so
can they sign up for that?
I have lots of different offerings. So generally it's by demand. If I have several people who want it, then I'll start offering it. So it's generally word of mouth. But for organizations, yeah, I have a whole plethora of things. I do board training. So for organizations, I do trainings on your board, trainings on your program and staff, and how to, um, make an inclusive, diverse, equitable, and inclusive society, community that really does talk about white supremacy in a way that unearths it and that it doesn't feel like anybody's indicted, but that you're acknowledging and moving on from it. We do that for organizations. Now, for individuals, if you would like an individual coaching, I do also offer executive coaching to
Oh,
mostly
okay.
white women, because white women I have found to be some of the most harmful people in workspaces for
Correct.
black people.
Hmm.
White men, they be harmful, but they just be about their business. They don't really be,
Hmm.
you know what I'm saying? They
Let's
ain't
go
as bad.
golfing, bro. Right,
Yeah,
right.
right. But white take you down. And so I teach white women how to not Emmett Till black people on a daily basis, because that's what they do. They Emmett Till
Not
black
even tell
people.
them.
Yeah, so that's what you do. Because when white women cry, black people die. That's what I tell them.
Hmm. I say every time a white woman cries, those are nuclear
They don't get to
codes.
cry around me. Dry
Those
that.
are
Dry.
nuclear bombs dropping every time they cry.
You have to dry that up because you don't get to cry. I don't get to cry.
That's right. We damn sure don't get to cry. But Kristie, so again, so we could meet you. Do you have a website or is it just social media?
Don't have a website. So if people want to reach me
Okay.
on social media, it's at Kristie, Kristie underscore 1979 on IG, Kristie Puckett on Facebook, and on TikTok, it's the same, Kristie underscore 197.
All right, we got to have you back on. We got to continue this
Anytime.
conversation, because this was fantastic, and this is why we do this, right? As you said, like it's to give politics and to give it from a real, honest black and brown perspective, because some folks feel like as long as we have a 19 point plan and graphs and charts, people don't hear that shit. So we appreciate you for all your time, and we kept you longer than I promised you. I told you this conversation. I didn't get to any of the questions that I sent you,
It's okay.
as
We'll
I
do it
told
next
you.
time.
But thank you again, Kristie. You have a great evening, and thank you for joining the Radical Roots.
All right. Thank you,
Yes,
guys.
thank you
Have a good
very
night.
much. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye
Bye.
bye. All right, folks, that was Kristie Puckett. Rom, I
Hey,
told you, brother.
digging deep to reach higher. for sure.
What are your thoughts on Kristie before we head
Uh,
out of here?
Great energy. I mean, I love it how she's direct, doesn't mince her words, honest. So truth teller. And I think I was very interested in like her communication style, and how she's you know bringing up these conversations, because people like I mean, the same thing you said. People got to be comfortable, feel uncomfortable, right? So, um, challenge your beliefs, your status quo. Like, I think
Your
that's key.
biases.
Yeah, and that's key right now, because a lot of people, so we went out, and I was struggling. I'm a little sick, so I was kind of struggling. I'm still
All
there,
good, all good.
but we were out there, and like this April 5th is a huge subject right now. And it's like, well, what are you, I think we're gonna put out a video tomorrow. Like, what are you willing to sacrifice? But um and I think she said it right tonight. Like, what are you willing to sacrifice? Your whiteness is kind of like a good way to put it, because yeah,
That
you
was a
could.
bar.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's probably one of the most simple ways to put, to say it. But when you start unpacking it, I mean, yeah, it kind of makes a lot of sense. So yeah.
Yeah, no,
What
I
would
thought
you
it was
think?
great, and I thought it was great. And again, I met her one time 2 years ago. She gave this impassioned speech. I don't even know what the hell we were in Charlotte about. Um, Oh, I think it is right before the Dobbs decision fell.
Mhm.
And again, I could be, I could be wrong. No, actually, no, it wasn't, because the Dobbs decision was in 2022. I became chair in 2023, so it was in 2023. But I really do forget what it was. But I just remember she was laying it out, chapter and verse. And I remember I walked up to her and I said kind of the very similar thing. Hey, I'm the brand new chair. Now my term is ending in what is it? In daggone 13 days. And at the time, I was probably 13 days in. So full circle this moment, and just my growth as a speaker and as someone that is trying to educate people. And she probably doesn't even realize that she was probably one of my biggest motivators to keep going. And I only met her that one day, and that sort of a ferocious uh, truth seeker and truth teller, in the face of power, because power isn't just politicians. Power is people that wield power in a society that is built on their skin color being power. And it just sent a chill down my spine. I felt electrified. And when I seen that video a couple of days ago, man, I was like, I got to reach out to her. And again, it was a shot in the dark. We had a cancellation this Sunday, and I think this was apt timing.
Yeah, for sure. With right along with these protests, and very, like I said, at Union County meeting we met, is contagious, right? Like I'm like, oh man, he's spitting facts, he's spitting bars. Let me talk to him. Hey, this would be a good person to start a podcast with. And I don't know if I was even like how serious I was when I first brought it up, or like if y'all would even like be interested, you and Andrew at the time. But
Yeah, right.
yeah, I mean, yeah, like, and like she said, she does personal coaching and things like that. She's just a regular person. Like, we're just
A
regular
regular person.
people, and we're just regular DIs, and
We had three
like,
DIs on. And, I,
um,
and folks, I got one video that I'm going to edit down. We actually ran into a MAGA guy, a Republican, and at the end, I'm probably gonna put it at the beginning just to get folks interested in the video. But he was like, "I have ADHD." I was like, "Oh, so you're a DEI?" And he was like, but yeah, but it just as we're moving through this again, trying to build bridges and make connections with people who may not understand. Again, my goal was not to convert that man, but my goal was one to stymie any sort of negativity he's going to spew out for that day and trying to disrupt the event. Even though we have our critiques of the event, we don't want nobody trying to be a disruptor who clearly has an ill intention. And he himself is a useful idiot for the thing. You'll see the interview that we'll
yeah.
put out. I'm
Mhm.
going to edit it down. He himself is a useful idiot for white
Yeah,
supremacy.
you were talking to Trayvon, and I heard like "God Bless America" playing, and it didn't even like, I didn't think much of it at
I'm
first.
proud to be an American.
I didn't think much of it at first. I'm like, okay, somebody's out here playing
Right.
that, and then and then
Me
I
too.
then I saw
I
the,
thought it was one of them. I thought it was like one
yeah,
of the folks
yeah,
from the joint.
right, like, and then
It kind of matched up. I was like, okay.
yeah, and then I saw the truck, and then I
With the
saw him,
Punisher.
and I saw him, kind of he opened up all his doors, and he's fumbling around the back and opening up each
Fumbling.
door, closing, and and so I'm like, okay, I see what you're here for. And then so like I was like, all right, like
You saw the
sir,
tattoo with the flag and the cross on it. I
yeah,
was like, oh, okay,
it was
okay, I got it.
so yeah, let's interview him. And so, we ended up interviewing. It was funny. We ended up
It was a good
interviewing him
interview.
for about 20 minutes. And I
Hmm.
think he kind of shined a light on his ignorance. And it wasn't like this. It wasn't even disrespectful.
No,
It was a cordial conversation.
absolutely.
He's not some, he didn't come across as a violent
Mm-mm.
person. Obviously, he came to stir up a little
Sure,
confrontation, but there was a lot of
that's
things
his right.
he's like, I've never heard that. And even for me, like, and I'm like, I mean, you were just saying some basic shit. Like, it wasn't even like you were uncovering something deep and unknown. And I'm like, these
No,
people are actually like
quite ignorant,
ignorant.
and I mean
We
that
gotta talk about that
like
all this.
textbook
Yeah,
different.
the
I'm not
definition,
saying
but
like he
yeah, because
right.
I talk about that like in high school, middle school last week. We were talking about like, or Thursday, like I'm used to it, like, right. But it's just some of those things. It's just like, man, you're, 50 years old, and damn, like, so, I mean, when do you plan to learn this? And that's why I asked him, like,
Never.
what are your sources? And he's like, well, the
Oh,
internet. And I wanted to find out more. I'm like, the internet? Oh, really? Like, yeah.
something tells me it was not the internet. Something tells me like it's Fox News, it's OANN, it's News Nation, it's these places. And the thing is that the thing about white supremacy, and I definitely want to have Kristie back on the show because clearly sis lays it out. But another thing about white supremacy, it's cowardly. It doesn't admit what it's doing. That's why I'm not a racist and all this. It's always them. I don't have a racist bone in my body.
He said,
I'm the least.
yo,
I'm the least most.
remember when he said, I got black friends,
And anytime a racist white
just
person
like
tells me that,
clockwork.
I'm always like, so are you counting them? Because then they're like, well, I have three. It's like, dude, you have that many black that my. And also like during the election too, when on the other side of it, talking to folks about like black folks voting for Trump, and they're like, I've seen a lot of black people, and I'm always like, what's a lot of black people to you? Then they're like, six. Like six is a lot of black people. Okay, I got more than six black people on speed dial, but no, yeah. So you'll see that interview come
Yeah,
out,
and
and
the one other thing
yeah,
that was good about this interview we did, like, so he had to turn down his music, and this, we started interviewing before the parade, the protest came back, and so when it came back,
Rob is genius for this man, genius.
the whole protest goes by, and he's still interviewing us with his
The
music
march.
down. So he done missed his whole intent. He done missed it all. And then, when it was all over and people were trying to pull off, he turned it back up and whatever. But
Yeah.
I guess he had time to do that. But hey, and these are the type of people we say, like, we're not, what are we trying to do to get? I don't think we're convert them.
No.
I don't think that's the intention. But sometimes, and they're definitely the folks that aren't going to care until it really hits them hard. But and
And you'll see, like he clearly didn't know what was actually impacting him,
Mhm.
and he was just trying to have this amorphous. The country's broken, and
Well,
but
he's buying the coup. Like, he literally, since he was buying whatever they were saying since Wednesday when the tariffs went off, he's like, well, we got to. He was kind of saying that we got to feel this pain now, or to fix it now, to fix it forever because something's deeply wrong. And so that was something like you would have heard. Remember, like 3 months ago, they were talking about eggs and milk, and now they're talking about you got to feel the pain and we got to
you gotta
rebuild
feel
this
it, man.
country. Like, what we weren't
Got
even,
to.
you weren't even saying that 2 weeks ago. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Like you just got this whole new talking point.
So,
But
and the other thing we talked to, sorry, I'm going real quick.
no, you're good. You're good,
We
bro.
talked to somebody else, and we always talk to people, and they talk about they have family, and Alabama, Arkansas, or even here, like,
Oh yes,
they all
yes,
have
yes.
family somewhere,
They
right?
are
And they say,
right.
like,
It's not them, but
yeah,
right.
it's like they have family that's MAGA and everything, and I'm like, well, and what you said in November is like, I mean, if you got somebody in your house or somebody in your life or somebody you sleep in bed with, and they're MAGA, whatever, and you can't take up that war, that battle. And I'm not saying it has to be like this, altercation, verbal
Violent, right.
altercation, violent altercation. That's why I was telling one of the organizers from Individual. I was like, maybe we should have some courses on how to intervene, how to have an intervention for cult-like tendencies, right? Because
But even then, they were like, "It's not a cult." It's like it's kind of what we're talking about today. Like
it's the tendencies.
if you can't accept it, like you can't fight it. So this whole like it's not.
And
Why are you defending them?
I mean, I've watched a few episodes. I don't know the name of the podcast or whatever, the show, but there's people who were previous Trump and MAGA supporters, and they now do like an intervention podcast. But there is like, I think
Only
these
they
people
can
need
do it
some. If you
though.
can arm them with techniques to communicate with your family, if you
Hmm.
can't talk to like your mom and dad about like the harm they're causing on, you know, your friends, your daughters, your like.
Bingo.
So
Hey,
like,
you watch Midas Touch, right?
yeah.
They had I haven't listened to them in a while, but they're good guys. But they had a auxiliary group or an auxiliary guy named Dr. Steve Hassan. He
Mhm.
was a cult expert. Do
Yeah, he
you have you
might
listened
be
to
him.
him?
It might be actually. It might be one of the people I'm talking about.
Yeah, so he was a part of the Moonies, the 1970s China, it was a Chinese or Korean uh, cult.
Mhm.
Anyway, but his whole point about how he got out of it, it takes someone who was in the cult to help people get out of the cult. Because and he tells stories that like he was ready to kill himself for Jesus Christ, even though he's Jewish. You know, all this crazy shit. He's ready to go assassinate the president in the 1970s, all this crazy shit. But he says that like it takes someone who was in it to get you out of it. And anybody that came from the outside saying, Steve, you know, his parents, you weren't like this. He tells them, no, you're the devil, you're crazy. Same thing with us. You have Trump derangement syndrome. It's like, so you need someone who is either, dare I say, a ex MAGA or someone who has proximity. Because if you have proximity, because me and Ram and I do not have proximity to these people. So don't ask us to try to go out and talk to them because I mean that guy I think it just worked out and I think he had enough goofy tendencies that you were like this guy's yeah, he's all right, like you know I don't think he has like an AK-47. He
Yeah,
could have or an AR-15 in the
I'm
back.
sure he's got something,
I'm
but
sure.
but
I
you
mean because
know,
you're a tall guy, you're a big guy, you know. I'm like
yeah, but he
no
wasn't.
I'm
He
talking
wasn't. He wasn't. You know, he wasn't threatening, right? He wasn't.
no
Uh. So you know, but he also wasn't like the type of people where you could just make a bunch of clips and I can make a fool of him. But he like it was like the type of person. And again, I also on the flip side, I asked the same question, like, well, what are we supposed to do when we're confronted with that? And I think you know what you did was
yeah
educate them and
yeah
had that conversation. But like, well, what after that? Like, I don't know. I'm not
because
too sure.
immediately after we were walking to the folks that had the shirts,
Mhm.
I looked across the street. He's there blasting Lee Greenwood again, all the windows. So I was like, that was 20 minutes away. I think is good for the protest or
Mhm.
the march to go back and forth. But like to your point, for
Like we could
him,
have been like, "Yo, you're a fucking idiot," or like, and we could have been disrespectful. We could have said
right?
like, you know, things because I told you I don't have the patience for it, but we still, you know, had the patience for it. Like when it came down
I
to
think
it,
too. Like
like,
we knew we were on camera to a degree, so it was like, all right, I'm not gonna intentionally record myself being a dick. You know, let's let him be all the dick. And I think he wasn't a dick, to be honest.
yeah,
I'll be very fair. I don't think that guy was a dick because his name was Mark. He was just very ignorant by the textbook definition of what the word ignorant, like lacking
mhm,
information.
yeah,
And he was making decisions with that dearth of information not being there. And it's like that's the problem because individual decisions have universal consequences.
yeah,
But folks, we are at a hour and a half. This is probably our shortest episode in a long time. But that was a great conversation. We got to get Kristie back on. I thoroughly enjoyed that. And Ram, you know, you really had some great questions and content as well around that to get her to expand on a lot of things. But yeah, that's what we're looking for here in the Radical Roots. So if you guys stay with us or if you guys are listening on replay, this is what we're about. And we are always looking for folks to like, share, and subscribe because we need that. You know, please make sure you're telling folks if you got anything out of this episode. You know, write us, DM us, let us know what you found that was interesting. Let us know if you disagree with something. Let us know if there's something that you had withheld in you that you want to challenge, or something that you you want to educate someone else about. Like that's what the point of this is. It's an open dialogue. Ram and I, we're also still learning. You know, so neither of us are experts, but we just want to make a difference. And that's the point of our podcast and the point of our show.
yeah,
So if you need to find us, Radical Roots on Instagram, Facebook, uh, was I'm say Twitch,
yeah.
TikTok,
Couple,
TikTok. Go ahead,
yeah,
Ron.
yes. You're not on Twitch, but TikTok, yeah, YouTube, Facebook.
Soon to be
I
on
do.
Twitch.
I do want to have like we're gonna have a little 2 minute after hours because I will say there's a couple things this week. Walmart
Yeah.
protests. I don't know who's leading that, but apparently it's tomorrow. I haven't.
Oh,
I've.
I don't go to Walmart.
So I've bought a couple things at Walmart since what January. I've never been a big Walmart shopper, but I go to them if Amazon doesn't have something. But anyways, this week the 7th was tomorrow, the 7th through the 14th, I guess. It's
Okay.
a Walmart protest, so don't shop at
Hmm.
Walmart. And the Monroe City Council meetings on Tuesday. I'll be there.
Unfortunately, I can't make that. I got a meeting at 7 o'clock.
And it's all good. I'll be there. And then no bouncy,
Let our
no bounce.
let our boy hear it. Let our boy
Yeah, somebody wants
let
to.
him know that we see you. We see you, player.
If somebody wants to bring a bouncy castle, to
Oh God, wrong, so wrong. He was trying to get her
uh,
muscles up, man. Now you up here making fun of. Oh my,
that
inside
one
joke.
is some people probably heard about that, but apparently a white woman wanted a bouncy castle at the
She gave
protest, one of these
her she
protests
gave her
for
analysis.
the kids to do to do something while this protest or parade, whatever. Um, it was a little too, like I said, it was a little too festive. But like I said, people, you got to start somewhere. So not gonna knock it too hard, but
And we can still make fun
at
of him.
least humble yourself when you talk about bouncy castles and people are like telling you like this is fucked up. Humble yourself and listen, because you're gonna come across people telling you like you're not like you don't understand, you're fucking up, and you have to have that.
Hmm.
But the last thing, I have a question. So one thing I had thought about since this protest is I noticed people were like thanking us for being there, and I didn't think much of it at the time. But I was like,
Right.
and then afterwards I was like, well, is it because like we're two black and brown men? Is it because you have a shirt that says the press, or was
I
it
think
just
probably that.
or was it because it was just like they were thanking everybody? It was just something I thought about, like that went through my head.
No,
So
yeah,
like,
that's a good question. I think it's a combination of all three. I think it's, one, we didn't have no signs. So we clearly weren't out there like, and we weren't ever paying attention to what the hell was going on at the tent. We didn't give a shit who was singing. And at a certain point they were singing America the Free. Was that the song? They were
was it?
like,
Oh
oh,
yeah.
it was before you got there.
Oh, okay. I
That
was.
song. On one of our clips, there's a girl wearing a Palestinian keffiyeh. If you listen in the background, they're singing. The whole crowd is singing. What's that song? Is this land is yours?
Oh, this
This
land
land
is
is
your
ours.
land. Oh, I don't
From
know. I'm sorry.
California.
I'm sorry. I don't know all the names.
I don't know. That's what I'm saying. I was like, I have never been to a protest like this. Oh, they out here singing that. And then another time they were singing.
This land is your land.
This, okay, another time they were saying this was when me and you were walking through the crowd. They were singing "We Shall Overcome," and in my mind I was like, "What are y'all overcoming?"
I kind of had a cringe moment at that when we were walking through and that play. I don't know. I just remember like the anthem being like, "We gonna be all right."
Right.
like
I'm like,
I
okay.
like that was the type of
Right.
thing. But hey, like I said, I'm not gonna knock it because
Shabuzi's
too
gonna be the
hard,
next thing.
because these people got to start somewhere.
Got
And
to start somewhere.
but now that they're roped in,
Right.
let's
And
give
I
them a
think
train.
that's my critique too, is that like, I think me and you talked about this on our last episode. That like, I just don't want this to be, and I've seen posters about it, like, this is not this is not a moment, it's a movement. Let's see, because if you're so focused on between the hours of 11 and 1 p.m. on April 5th, what are you doing when you get back to your wealthy neighborhoods with a bunch of Republican neighbors, with a bunch of right-wing neighbors that don't want us to live in a multicultural, pluralistic society? What are you doing when your boss is not going to promote that black girl on Monday that is more qualified than you, but they're going to tap you as a white man or a white woman? Like, what are you doing when you see the police pulling people over and their faces on the ground, or you're driving past saying they must have deserved it? Like, I hear you, and as me and you have said countless times now, in 2020, there was no specific day. It was,
Hmm.
we out here.
And
You was in Chicago, I was in Charlotte, and it didn't matter. It didn't matter. I don't care what I was working in uptown Charlotte. I had a suit and tie on, but I take that suit off and I'm like, I'm whatever, right? Getting pepper sprayed, right?
yeah,
Getting,
because
I didn't get harmed by the police, but like, a lot of folks did.
because you pointed out the other day, I didn't even think about it, but like this time boxed protest was not like a little, like that wasn't a thing back when I was protesting. And so that is different. And that's why Joe Rogan's like, they get paid because they clock in at 11, they leave at 1. Then that's not true, but
Right.
it was like that.
Like, cha-ching,
It was like the march came back at like 1 o'clock, and like everyone was
on
driving
time.
home.
I'm like, this is a white time. The white time be on time, boy.
But yeah, but we did talk about in our first, I think it was like our first or second episode, we were talking about, I think I brought up that I think it's important that the least vulnerable of the people in society are the ones that are getting out there on the front lines, because,
Oh
and
yes.
so we've been saying that for some time. Um, And that's still the case today, right?
But I guess
Because
my question too, I mean, I don't want to make this any longer of an
Mhm.
episode, but I guess my
it's
final question to you is like, so let's just say he takes the terrorists back on Tuesday. I mean, I think they're supposed to hit next week or the week after that, something like that. But like, let's just say he rolls them all back. Now what?
well, it's the stock market is not going to roll back that quick, but yeah, that's a good question because a lot of
You know
people,
what I
I don't
mean?
think a lot of people aren't really in it until they're feeling it and personally. So that's the unfortunate part.
Mm.
But more and
I ain't gotta
more, it's
get I
chipping
ain't gotta
away.
get shots to know the letter's hot, brother.
So you know, we'll
And
we'll we'll see. I mean, that's a lot of strategy for a lot of folks. Is like, oh, we'll just wait till they hurt, and then they'll come and be a Democrat or they'll vote Democrat. I don't think it's going to work. A lot of people can't afford to do that. So, we'll see.
We'll see. We'll see. Well, folks, again, thanks for listening to the Radical Roots podcast. It was an amazing show. We are now close to our usual time. But it was a great one. And we thank Kristie Puckett again for coming on the show. Rom, it was great talking to you, brother. I'm your co-host, Ron Baxter.
I'm your co-host, Ram Sandoval. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great night, a great rest of your week,